So, thanks for staying and welcome to the industrial panel discussion. And we have three great panelists and they're just great. So you can ask much tougher questions towards them. Okay. But first of all, let me introduce the moderator, my colleague, Dr. Kip Womack. Kip is an associate professor of real estate in the college, and his research is about everything real estate, valuation, development, corporate finance issues associated with real estate investment trusts. And so I'm going to turn this over to Kip. The floor is yours.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Hsu. By the way, I also should say that I'm a co-author on the report. So anything that you thought was interesting, compelling, that's my stuff. And then all those other numbers you didn't care for, that's more like Young Chung's thing. But thank you for joining us, sticking around and joining us for the industry panel session of our 2023 State of Housing in Charlotte report. So it's my honor to be a moderator and be joined by my esteemed guests. We have someone from different aspects of the industry. So I think it's going to be a really compelling conversation. We've already had a couple of meetings and we could have gone forever on those. So it'll be hopefully very informative for you guys. So let me introduce my panelists. To my immediate left, Anne-Marie DeCatsye, CEO of Canopy Realtor Association. You probably know Canopy best through the MLS, but they also have the Canopy Real Estate Institute and the Canopy Housing Foundation. So welcome, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
Fred Dodson is no stranger to these parts. CEO, Executive Vice President of DreamKey Partners. It's a firm that has a holistic approach to affordable housing. And that's going to be something that we're going to ask Fred about here in just a little bit for him to expand on that. But he manages the organization's real estate development and construction activities for DreamKey. So welcome, Fred. Last but not least, we have Yates Dunaway. He's the Senior VP of Multifamily at Crosland Southeast. He's responsible for sourcing, underwriting, and managing market rate multifamily development and acquisition opportunities. So thanks a lot, guys, for joining us. So before we by the way, before I get started too far on this panel, I wanted to say that the last 10 minutes of the panel we'll reserve for questions from the audience. I think the first round of questions from the audience, those were really interesting questions. I think we're going to touch on a lot of those things in our panel. But if we don't, feel free to ask questions there at the end. So just to start off, I just want to get the panel's reaction. Kind of, what's your kind of immediate reaction to the report we just saw? So maybe we'll just go down the road. So Anne-Marie, your thoughts?
So I think my immediate reaction is the concern of affordability and availability and accessibility for the still middle income family to own a median price home and needing an income of $176,000. It seems crazy and it just gets worse.
Right. By the way, I mean, in creating the report, Young Chung had the same experience. Like we have to double check, triple check some of these numbers. Like this can't be right. But unfortunately, they are correct. Fred, how about you?
Yeah, first of all, I want to clarify because I think my boss is watching. I'm the COO, right? Not the CEO.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thanks for the promotion.
I meant to
Yeah.
say
Fact check.
But I think for me, it's not surprising because as an affordable housing developer, we hear these stories every single day. People who are just priced out of the market and they're doing the best that they can to either become homeowners or find affordable rental. I've been an affordable housing developer my entire career. This is the most challenging time, without a doubt. And if it's challenging for me, it's challenging for the people that we're trying to house. So it wasn't surprising.
Yates.
I think for me, it's kind of scary to say, but Charlotte's actually relatively affordable compared to some of the comparable cities, either in the region, Asheville, Charleston, or nationally, as Dr. Chu showed with Tampa, Orlando. So I think that just highlights for me, it's a national problem that the country's experiencing, and I think there are certain things maybe we'll talk about today that I think we can do locally. But as Dr. Chu alluded to, I mean, the biggest input on what something costs are the materials and the labor, and we're not manufacturing our own lumber, necessarily. We're getting that from all over the country and all over the world, and so some of the supply chain disruption that happened during COVID and is now being maybe exacerbated due to governmental policies and governments not getting along, is really the biggest input to what's causing housing prices, development costs to go up.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comments from your peers about reaction to each other? Anything that you said that maybe you want to comment on?
Well, I'll say, he mentioned kind of the government stepping in and helping by cooperating. I think we saw that during COVID and all the federal funding that went to help the country through that terrible time. And then you wonder, so why are we stopping? Because it's not really over, and those programs work. One of the good examples is the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA funding that's been used in Charlotte and elsewhere to build affordable housing. Well, we should probably keep doing that because it worked, right? So I just had to bring that up. Good, he reminded me of that.
All right, so my first direct question, and this is admittedly a little bit self-serving, but this marks our 5-year anniversary of doing the State of Housing report. So, and Marie, wanted to ask you, has this report benefited Canopy? Have you put it into use? And if so, maybe how, and how's this maybe help your efforts to promote affordable housing?
Sure. I think, first of all, we're very proud to have been a sponsor for 5 years. And it's hard to believe that we're at the 5-year mark, and we've really appreciated all the work that's gone into the report. And I don't think we really knew what to expect. And clearly, if we started in 2019, we didn't expect COVID. So it's been an interesting but kind of scary ride to watch the stats. But at the same time, it has really served as really to energize Canopy and the real estate and building industry coalition to look at what positive solutions we can work on, because there is one easy solution to build, but it's not a really easy solution. So there has to be multiple solutions to it, and we've been working on those.
Okay, is there any particular strategy that you want to talk about that has gained momentum and something you're encouraged about?
So we actually have a couple of different ones. I do want to comment on the fact that, yes, we need more housing, but we need to also make sure folks can stay in their home if they want to stay in their home, and preclude gentrification to the extent that we can. So our probably number one priority is expansion of the Homestead Act, so that right now it's the same income amount across the state. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense when you look at markets like Charlotte compared to the rest of the state. And the age limit is 65 right now. And so we think we should, lower the age limit, look at the income requirement, and just make it more accessible for folks to be able to utilize that exemption and stay in the home. So that's one thing that we're doing. Another thing we're excited about, we got a $200,000 grant from the General Assembly to look at adaptive reuse. And we're doing this in conjunction with the Charlotte Business Alliance. And they've hired Ginsler, who is identifying, and I think you touched on this, the different types of non-residential existing commercial structures that could be adapted to reuse as residential. And so that study will hopefully be done by the beginning of the spring, so that we can have that information to take to the policymakers as well. And then, kudos to the City Council and the UDO and allowing for accessory dwelling units, because we think that has a real opportunity. And we're hoping for legislation at the state level that didn't take off this year, but I think we'll be more prepared for next year. So those are 3 of the things that we're working on.
Okay, thank you. So to provide a little bit of structure to the rest of our discussion, as we've pointed out in the report, we have a supply issue, right? The demand is coming. So if prices are a function of supply and demand, the demand's there. So we have to focus on supply. And if we break down supply, we can think about existing homes, maybe increasing the density of existing homes, new development, and then redevelopment and conversion. So maybe let's take the conversation to each one of those first, and maybe talk about existing homes. We've talked about the low mortgage rates. So of course, I looked it up yesterday. About 2/3 of existing homeowners have mortgage rates less than 4%. 90% have interest rates less than 6%. And as we noted, currently mortgage rates are hovering almost at 8, right? So is there hope for some of these existing homes is there anything that you're seeing that would maybe encourage you that we're going to get more inventory?
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of hearing the chief economist for the National Association of Realtors a couple times in the last month. And one of the things the National Association of Realtors is working on is incentives at the federal level, tax incentives to encourage people to sell their homes and get out of the higher interest rate and the low interest rate, not worry about a higher interest rate on the capital gain side. That might loosen up some. But what also is going to happen is just natural occurrence of births and deaths and divorce and moves and jobs that is going to hopefully also free up some. But it is not going to happen overnight. And I think there are a lot of people who are very comfortable with their 3% or lower mortgage rate that it would take a bit for them to be willing to sell their house.
Yeah.
And there's the issue of where they would go.
Right. Absolutely. So let's move on to maybe increasing the density of existing homes. So maybe accessory dwelling units. So Fred, do you want to talk about that? And I know that you have a partnership with True Homes.
Yeah, we're working on a concept with True Homes, which I'm very excited about, and it's really to incentivize existing homeowners who are on large lots, like the 1950s, 1960s neighborhoods like I live in Windsor Park on the east side of Charlotte, where we have huge lots that we could put another house on that lot and provide an incentive for the homeowner to do that and to have affordability restrictions on the accessory dwelling unit for a 15-year period. And if we finance it correctly, then at the end of the period, not only will the homeowner enjoy some of the cash flow from the rental unit, because these are rental units behind their homes, but at the end of 15 years, they will own it outright. And so I think, once we get this established in the city, when the UDO changes were very important and very helpful to incentivize us to do it. I think you'll see a lot more of that. And these aren't big homes. These are homes that are 400 or 500 square feet behind existing homes, and most likely it may be your mother or a relative, because the home buyer has to agree as to who's going to be living in that unit. The one thing that we still need to figure out is the property management, because these are scattered sites, and so we got to perfect that and get a source of funding so we can roll this out and make it sustainable. But I think it has a bright future.
Very good. All right, so maybe let's not now talk about new development, right? If existing homeowners aren't going to move, if we, they're enjoying the low mortgages, we're going to maybe add some accessory dwelling units, but we're still going to need more. We're probably going to just need new homes, right? When I say new homes, basically new housing, single family, multifamily, public assistance, all across the spectrum. So Yates, maybe talk about maybe multifamily. And do you think we've talked a lot already about NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. Do you see trends about that changing? Is there anything that you're seeing out there in the market that's maybe the public's maybe coming to a realization that we actually, we have to put these somewhere?
I think I might talk out of both sides of my mouth for that answer. I think that there's still somewhat of a near-term perception that, and it's right, that there's been so much apartment supply locally lately. Do we really need more apartments? And I think, as Dr. Chu pointed out in his report, part of the reason why, or a large part why, rental rates have softened or not growing quite as quickly, whereas the for sale is not the same, is because of that supply. And I think there's also a perception that somebody renting a home doesn't care for the home nor the surrounding environment as much as if they own that home and had true equity and stake in it. But I think as the United States shifts, which has long been the case in other countries, to a larger percentage of for rent, that perception, right or wrong, of somehow a rental resident being worse or slightly worse than a owner will start to diminish. And so it'll be, more receptive. But I think near term, no, it's tough because, the NIMBYism definitely comes up when, we'll go in with a piece of land that's zoned for 3 units per acre, and we want to increase that to 20 units per acre. I mean, that's a huge increase. But we can provide, more housing, and supply is the answer, at a cheaper cost than a big home. But the council members that have to make that decision to allow us to do that change of use have all the neighbors lining up going, no, not in my backyard. And what's funny is a lot of times some of those neighborhoods aren't even that old. So they were the ones that, that land was raw 5 years ago. And now all of a sudden, oh, no, you can't do that over here. Well, that's the neighborhood you moved into. So I think it's still definitely a headwinds, but hopefully over time, the thought of rental housing becomes more and more acceptable.
Are there any new incentives being considered at the city, county, or state level that maybe will help developers build affordable housing?
I think during COVID, when costs were so high, not that they've gone down, but we did see some innovation during that time, particularly at the state level, because a lot of the tax credits that we use to fund our developments come from the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and I talked to them for many years about the fact that their cost per unit cap was way too low, and this is way before COVID. And they realized that during COVID that they just needed to lift those all together because costs are what they are. We're not making it up. Mm-hmm. And so that's the type of innovation that we needed during that time. Now, of course, they're talking about putting cost caps back in place to some extent, but in a lot more flexible way. But we do need a revolution when it comes to policy changes for the low-income housing tax credit. It needs to be fixed so it can work in this type of environment, because right now it doesn't really work all that well. And there's some things kind of floating around Congress that would make a big change, make a big difference, but it needs to happen.
I've sort of seen two things. One, there is some bonus density provisions where if you include a certain percentage of your units it's different, kind of depending on where you are, but 80% to 120% of AMI, you can get a bonus of how many units you can put on that piece of property. I would say, while it's good, it's, without going too much in the weeds, it's not a huge financial incentive, but it is a financial incentive. And I also say, kind of comparing Charlotte to other southeastern cities where we're active, Charlotte and Fred, you might be able to speak to this. We do have sort of the gap money or the housing money to where if affordable developer is saying, hey, in order for the numbers to work, I need essentially some free money so that I can offer homes at an affordable price or an affordable rent. And there are other cities where we're trying to do some of that, and they don't have that gap money. I mean, it's less formalized and it's less easy to get to. I'm sure we would love to have a lot more gap money here in Charlotte, but at least we have something to build on.
Yeah, we need gap funding, more gap funding through the form of the Housing Trust Fund, which is essential for us for the rental side of what we do. But we've also started using it for home ownership. That was a change that happened early, just a few years ago, which has been very, very important as we build affordable home ownership. And on the home ownership side, we also need more down payment assistance. The city has increased the amount of down payment assistance available, but for some people, still not enough. So we have to combine different sources so we can help people afford to buy a home.
Interesting.
And I'm just going to comment. The city of Charlotte, I think, has a 20% set aside for affordable housing, up to, I think it's 110% of AMI, or it might be even lower. But I think that if developers, one of the incentives that we're looking at is the developers could do it at 10% set aside, that they ought to have that flexibility. So that's one thing I think that we would encourage. And the other, I want to go back to the comment about rentals, and you're probably going to come back to it, but there's two real good reasons to own a home. And one is, that is probably the best way to create wealth and equity. And so there is a strong interest in making sure that folks can attain housing, purchasing a home. But at the same time, one of the things I think I pride Canopy on is with our foundation is we care about the whole spectrum from homelessness to homeownership. And we recognize that rental is important. It is a part of the puzzle, but at the same time, we don't want it rental at the expense of eventually being able to attain housing. So it is a component, and it is important, and it does fill that gap and that need. And not everybody wants to own a home, but they should have that option if they can. So.
All right. It's interesting, Fred, that I think a lot, and this is something we discussed, that a lot of people just kind of assume that nonprofits, y'all get a special break on some of these regulations and stuff, and because you're trying to help out, but that's not necessarily true, is it?
It's not at all true, right? And so that makes what we do even more difficult. But I will say that the city of Charlotte, the staff understands how important affordable housing is. So when it comes to like the plan review process, they work very hard to help get us through the process as quickly as possible. We still have the same hurdles that market rate developers have, but I will say I will give the city and Mecklenburg County credit for helping get our deals through a plan review. That's very, very important, but we still have the same costs that any other developer would have during the development process.
That's interesting. All right, so we've touched on existing and adding density to existing. We've talked about new. Let's talk about interesting subject, redevelopment and conversion. So whether it be office to residential, multifamily to residential, let's maybe talk about that.
Yeah, I can start, but just saying that right now we're working on our first historic renovation, adaptive reuse. It's not in Charlotte because there's not many opportunities to do historic work here, but this is actually in the big town of Yanceyville, North Carolina, population 2,000. But it's converting a historic African American high school into senior housing. We'll be doing the same thing in South Carolina and learning how that's done. And I think that's something that we can bring to Charlotte. Maybe not using historic credits, but hopefully we can. But adaptive reuse, I think, will become more important to us.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge or a little bit of a distraction from the real issue, because one, it's very complicated and hard to do, and there's a lot of risk. When you're building something from the ground up, exactly what you're doing, right? And you can evaluate and test an existing structure all you want, and then you take off a wall and you go, "Oops, I didn't realize that was there." And so there's more risk, and even though there's probably a lot of buildings, whether they're empty office buildings or old historic buildings, as the presentation showed, the problem's so large that this is just me speculating, but even if we could convert a lot of that stock to residential, I don't think it's going to put that much of a dent in the problem. So personally, I would want the discussion and the solutions to be around more broader ways to impact the affordability crisis.
When I mentioned that we RIBIC and the Alliance got funding from the General Assembly to study adaptive reuse, and I think that's part of the study is to identify what types of existing commercial non-residential could be easily converted, because clearly not all are alike. And earlier when we were at lunch, somebody brought up even using old churches. And I love the idea of an old school, and there's probably going to be, and you're right, it's a piece of the puzzle, but like I said, we've got to come at it from all angles. There's just not going to be one easy solution. The home builders were decimated during the downturn, and they are still coming out of that, and it was tough for them. So the home builders they're entitled to make a profit. They are not for profits. even the not-for-profit builders are struggling. So there's got to be more incentives for the market rate builders. And that's when, you know, the regulations on set-asides come into play, and speed of approval of the plans. All those little pieces would help bring about more housing.
Something we talked about in our conversation, Yates, was the potential to convert apartments into condos. Easier said than done, right?
Yeah, I think that's easier.
Surprisingly so.
And that goes back to what Anne Marie was saying about trying to, you know, while rental housing is an important piece of the puzzle, definitely, you know, want to have folks have as much opportunity to have home ownership as possible. Yeah, I think, you know, in the late 90s and into the 2000s, there was a big condo conversion craze where multifamily for rent properties were converted to condo, and due to laws and statute of repose, you know, there were a lot of lawsuits that went way back in the title to where some, you know, developer built an apartment complex, you know, 7 years ahead of some default down the road, and you know, a homeowner then sued, and it turned off this snowball of lawsuits that scared a lot of developers and a lot of general contractors from building condos or building apartments that could then be converted to condos. So it's almost, in my experience at least, become the norm of, if you're going to build something, you either need to build it for rent or for sale, and your contractor is going to make you write in your contract, you know, this won't be converted to for sale. If it is, we'll still build it for you. It's just going to be a different price. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll say, you got to find a different contractor. We're just in the business of for rent. So there's just been, you know, I don't know, just like with ambulance chasers, and I mean, there's been some bad situations, which I think too, to some extent has held down the condo craze of maybe 10 years ago. I mean, there aren't a lot of condos under construction, you know, period these days. And I think that part of what I just said is part of the reason. And the other reason is the value of apartments have increased so much that if you're in it for profit, you know, you can make money just building apartments versus building condos, where maybe in the past, you know, condos would have been more profitable.
And I didn't know that till our pre-call about the liability issue, because before our pre-call, I thought it was going to be much easier to take existing apartments and convert them into condo. And it would never have occurred to me that there were lawsuits because of defects in the construction, in the chain of title, and all that risk. So that was news to me and kind of concerning. So
I agree, absolutely. So it's hard to talk about or hard to talk to builders very long before they start talking about regulations, right? And, you know, rightfully so. But then it's also fair for the regulatory agencies that are local governments to say, okay, you know, it's not all on us to help make housing affordable. Builders, what are you doing on your side to make things affordable? So that's a fair question. So maybe we can talk about that, and maybe it's not as well articulated to the community about all the different initiatives that the building community has to address the issue.
I think it was either last year or the year before that somebody brought up the 4 L's, and that had to do with land, lumber, laws, and I forget the fourth one, but the land is still the biggest stumbling block to affordable housing for market rate builders and you know, nonprofits. I mean, so I think that the more there can be a partnership, a public-private partnership with the government and the builder, whether it's a market rate builder or a nonprofit builder, and dealing with the land, I think would go a long way in incentivizing builders. But I think that the builders still are looking for more relief in the review process as far as timing and timeliness, getting that through, because time is money. So I don't know that, again, even on that side, that there's one easy solution. There's multiple things that have to happen to first of all, to incentivize it, and then to make it happen.
Yeah, and just to speak for our firm, Crosland Southeast, you know, while we do look to build for profit, we're a for-profit company, you know, we have been educated and recognize the affordability crisis. And so about 3-4 years ago, we entered into the affordable tax credit realm as well. If time was our only resource, we should spend all that time just working on market rate opportunities and not on the tax credit opportunities. But it's a social need, and so we can do that and sort of hopefully help with that affordable a couple hundred units at a time. But again, to Anne Marie's point, I mean, I don't think there's one solution, and I hope that as it gets more in the news and more in the paper, and it's affecting, as Dr. Shu said, people's teachers and firefighters, et cetera, that more firms like Crosland Southeast that have the capabilities to spend some piece of their time, developing and delivering affordable housing. Folks, firms will do that.
But I'm just going to add to that. For you guys to do that, I have to believe there's a cost shift to the market rate. I mean, it just is a reality. So it's, again, not that easy. Not that.
No, it's not that easy. And we can do it two ways. One, we can do a standalone purpose-built tax credit financed affordable housing project, or within market rate, we can say on 10% or 20% of our units, we will keep it below a certain AMI threshold. And we're trying to do, both where we can, but we're not being forced to. And I think that's the fine line. I mean, I think when people get forced into things, they don't like to do them. When they can do them of their free will, maybe they'll do it. So hopefully as the education gets out there, people will do it more.
Okay, very good. We're getting close to where we're going to open it up for our live audience for Q&A. So start thinking about your questions, which you might want to ask there. But maybe to close out the panel is maybe take maybe 1-2 minutes and just maybe your final thoughts. Well, maybe your final comments to our audience.
Well, it's going to take everybody in the room, all of the private sector and the public sector to work on this issue. One of the things that really kind of a stat that came out was the affordability under 300,000. The availability of homes under 300,000 has gone from 35% to 22%, and it just seems to be going down. And so what is affordable? That definition is changing. The definition is changing for really what is affordable housing and the percentage of income that you need for that housing. So I think there's a lot of dynamics at play here that we need to grapple with.
I think from one of the things I often say when I do things like this is it's all about perspective. We talk a lot about, cost, regulation, but what if we focus on the people who live in the boxes that we build, right? And how transformative it is, when we do a good job, when we build them a nice house, not just for them, but for their families as well. And so if we take that perspective, then a lot of things will be possible that we don't think can be possible, because we will be willing to move heaven and earth to make sure that happens.
That's a great perspective. Yates.
I guess I'll just say it's as we've talked about, it's supply and demand. Right now the demand's high and the supply is low and doesn't seem to be likely to change. I found it very interesting in the presentation that the household formations are increasing, the size of those households is decreasing. And that was for Charlotte specifically. So I'm personally curious, does that mean Charlotte's getting younger? Does it mean whether as a result of COVID or social media or what, people just want to live by themselves and don't want to be around anybody else? And I don't know if that's a temporary shift or a more, permanent shift in the sort of household formation realm. So that was interesting to me.
One last thing to touch on before we get to the audience's questions. And Maria, I want you to share something that you talked about that's coming to the MLS starting in January. So we think about housing affordability, we can think about supply and demand, but we can also think about the borrowers or renters' ability to pay, and maybe some of the resources that are out there to help them. So there's a new going to roll out something kind of cool,
Yeah,
right?
there's actually two things coming and not necessarily January, hopefully first quarter. So I don't want to overpromise, but, and I'm going to put in a shameless plug that this is why folks need to work with a realtor who has access to the MLS. One of the products that we're getting is called Down Payment Resource. And this is a program, it's a national program. They have a database of 23,000 affordable housing, down payment resources, low-income mortgages. And what will happen is in the MLS with each listing that qualifies, there will be a down payment resource button and it'll take you to a link to that where all the available down payment programs and mortgage programs are available for that property, and the realtor will be able to work with their client in going through that process. The other thing we are going to be adding is a new rental section, and there is a company called Rental Beast, and they are a national program, and they have a database of all the rental units in our market. And that will become the rental section of the MLS. And this will allow our members to be able to assist clients who either aren't in a position to buy a home or there's no home available for them to at least get into housing. And they'll have a lot more at their fingertips. So those both will be coming hopefully by the end of first quarter, if not sooner.
Great.
So,
Look forward to that.
Thank you.
So at this point, we'll open up for questions from the audience. We have about 10 minutes for that. I think they're coming around with microphones.
There's a microphone coming.
Sewer and the county don't want to do water. So the county don't want to they want the developers to put the water, the sewer, the sidewalks and all that in. So all that cost is related back to the buyer. So what can you do about the county to hire some people that knows what they're doing? And say, okay, let's put some water and sewer. This road has been needed for a long time. There's more people here now. We got more tax dollars coming in. Why don't we get on this thing? Why don't we get better internet? Why don't we get better school? We've got people there. They're just not doing it. And the developers, they get held up in several different counties, saying that we've had our paperwork in, we've had all of our inspectors, everything done. It's just the county is not getting us what we need so we can start building, or so we can go ahead and purchase the contract. You get some land tracts under contract and they might be under contract 6 months to a year, and then all of a sudden they get denied. Then that seller gets a bad taste in his mouth, so I'm just not selling. And then why would you want to put multifamily way back in the county off some beaten road when you should put multifamily, I think, more in the city and single family houses more in the county?
I'll let the developers.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I guess two thoughts that come out of that. One, and again, I'm not trying to plug the city of Charlotte too much here, but Charlotte actually does a pretty good job from a staff standpoint. There are other areas in the Southeast where they're understaffed, they have staff turnover, and you'll submit your plans and get comments, and then you go do those comments, and then you submit them again, and they're all new comments. And it's like, well, if you had those comments, why didn't you give them to me the first time? Well, it's a whole new person with a whole new, and again, all that does is drive. That's true. But it's an interesting thought too, that, you know, we talked about NIMBYism some today. And if the county or the city, you know, spent time thinking about where they want to put sewer proactively, right? Put in the sewer. So then you make it easier for developers like me to say, well, I'm going to go over there and try and buy land because I know there's sewer over there. I know there's water over there, versus going somewhere where it's not. I mean, that's a way that they could sort of shift where growth would occur if they're trying to manage that.
I see those some areas, they come in there and they go change the zoning because that's on their to-do list. But if I wanna go in and change zoning or have one of my clients change zoning, it's like, what they're-
Yeah, I have a similar question related to NIMBYism and the lack of developed land. I think that's one of the major supply issues, right? Is we want to increase density, but we don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place to support additional cars on the road, water supply, utilities. Is that something that we can address in like a central way, or do you just leave it up to the towns and cities to deal with those issues?
I think that's one reason why we have towns and cities, right? To address those types of infrastructure needs. But as a developer, we also have to
do our part as well, sidewalks, making the connections and things like that. We don't get a free ride when it comes to that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
what about like state highway funding, like Highway 73 needs to be expanded to support additional, multifamily developments and stuff. What have the trends been like in Charlotte as far as the funding that we're getting from the state and, the federal government to support that infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that goes back to a little bit to the comment I made earlier. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, and if to Fred's point, developers do their part. So if and I don't think that's what your question actually is, but just like we do a traffic impact analysis, and if we are putting a development that is going to negatively impact the roads, we're required to make offsite changes to get it back to where it was before we showed up. Having said that, that's not improving necessarily. I mean, maybe in some cases it does, but it's not necessarily improving that corridor or that area. And so, but it's, I think it's up to the leadership to say that these are areas of bottlenecks or tension, and we need to the county city leadership needs to proactively go out and work on those areas. Because it's hard for a one-off project, to be lobbying to improve, 3 miles of highway. I mean, life's too short. We just go somewhere else,
I also think we need a coalition for NIMBYism. And everybody in this room needs to think twice when they look at a new apartment complex being built and think, why are they building that there? Why are they doing that? We all need to understand we need it. And I'm speaking from experience because my husband says it every time we drive by a new apartment complex, and I'm like, because we need it. And we do. So I think that it's incumbent on anybody who's involved in their HOA to get involved. It came up during our lunch earlier today that HOAs are often a stumbling block to ADUs. They can be stumbling blocks to other developments near them. And like you said earlier, Yates, it may be a new neighborhood and they were the new people 5 years ago. So it's not really fair. And it's really kind of selfish to not really want to have people move to Charlotte and have a place, the whole region, but have a place to live. And we can't say we want economic development on this hand and we need jobs, but somebody else needs to figure out where they can live. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, you can't say you're in favor of affordable housing and then fight density.
Right.
They're mutually exclusive.
Right.
Real quick, there are a lot of conversations about down payment assistance, gap money, incentives to help affordable housing. How do you suggest offering this money from the local or federal government without increasing taxes? Because if you increase the taxes to pay for these programs, aren't you ultimately hurting the same people that you're trying to help? Where's it come from?
So by creating homeownership, by using tax dollars we're growing the tax base. So, I mean, you have to look at it from that perspective as well. It's not that we're just giving out money to people and they're not going to do anything with it. You know, they're becoming homeowners and taxpayers. So I think that's the answer to the question.
Hey,
We
has
have
there been any
California.
thought about manufactured housing? I mean, it's been a stigmatized asset class or sub-asset class for a long time. But with design standards and construction standards that have improved and it truly being a path to affordable ownership, you know, is that something that do you think is viable in the community?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do that. You know, we've been building houses the same way for 500 years, right? And we don't build cars the way we build houses. You know, build it outside, exposed to the weather, right? Piece by piece. We build them in a factory setting. So, you know, building houses in that way we have to be heading in that direction.
Yeah, and on the multifamily side, some of the larger multifamily firms are experimenting with modular building where they're, you know, basically build an apartment community in a factory, break it down, put it on trucks and take it and put it back together. So yeah, I think we're heading that way.
Yeah.
2,000 innovators in housing construction now, and it's growing rapidly from rented, modular.
A lot of education opportunities there.
I think we have time for one last question.
Okay, great. I'm glad mine is the last one. So my question is around the deed restrictions that exist on some affordable housing. You know, I think we all agree, and it's been said before, I think Anne Marie, you said it, that, you know, generational wealth is achieved through home ownership. And so if the same people, to your point, who are receiving the funds for affordable housing have restrictions around how much those homes can be sold for in the future, are we really achieving the goal? So I would love to get your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I think that's the debate we've had. I've been with DreamKey for 26 years now. We've had that debate about what is the proper length of time. Is it 10 years, 15 years, you know, 20 years, 30 years? Right now, there's a push to increase the amount of time that we restrict land just because home prices are rising so quickly and neighborhoods are gentrifying. So this is a way to slow that down a little bit. But I don't think there's a perfect answer for that. But I think it's probably a variety of time periods as far as for how long are we restricting these homeowners, because we want them to achieve the American dream of selling their home, building generational wealth, and using their equity to buy the next home.
Yeah, and Fred that's his line of work, not mine, but I could just imagine if I were him, if the leaps and bounds you have to go to deliver an affordable unit, and if 1 year later that was sold for full market value and it's no longer an affordable unit, it's a market value unit, that kind of defeats the goal of delivering the affordable housing. But I also understand that if you're trying to create the American dream, you've got to be able to benefit from the appreciation at some point.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're going to have to call it there. We could spend, as usual, all day talking about these important issues. But wanted to thank each of our panelists. Your comments and insights were extremely informative. This is going to officially conclude our discussion. But before we officially conclude the event, have 5 quick announcements for you. First, we want to thank our research partners. Without their support, we literally couldn't do this. And just FYI, not only do they provide financial support, but they give us their time and talents. They're in their classrooms, they're on our board of advisors. We could not have asked for better partners. So thank you so much to them. Second, we want to thank you, our audience, both joining us both in person and online. If you're interested in viewing the report, you can follow that QR code that's there. And I also believe that a video of the both presentations will be out there eventually. So check back for that in the near future. Third, please help us plan for future events by completing a short survey. By doing so, not only will you be helping, but you're also going to be entered into a chance to win the highly coveted Belk College merch and swag. I believe this year they're going to come out with a muscle shirt in honor of our football coach, but you know, just you might have to wait on that one. Fourth, we wanted to invite you back all right here in this room, December 14th for our North Carolina economic forecast. So you're same thing, free, just register, and we'd love to have you for that. And of course, the most important announcement, we love to invite you to our networking reception just outside those doors, where we look forward to continuing this conversation over some good food and some good drinks. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at one of our future events. Thank you.